Hey guys, Iron Upcake here, and today we're going to be starting a new video series playing through the Penumbra games, beginning with Penumbra Overture. If you haven't heard of the Penumbra series before, it was developed by Frictional Games, the developers of Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and the games are much the same, they're survival horror games. This video series is intended to be a sort of walkthrough or commentated playthrough depending on what you want to get out of it. But in any case, I will try to be informative as I play, and I will be including video chapters if you're just looking for something specific. I will say that I think these games are better played to be experienced rather than simply beaten, but do as you like. To get the ball rolling, when you start a new game, you're presented with your standard 3 difficulty options, but in my experience it doesn't make that big of a difference. Since these are survival horror games trying to tell a story, numerical adjustments to the enemy are kind of secondary to that, so just play on whatever difficulty suits you best. I will be playing on hard though, because I want to make sure any explanations I give or tricks that I show off work for everyone regardless of difficulty. So without further ado, grab your headphones, dim the lights, and let's get started with the game's intro.
For my part in this allegory, I'm not going to make the same mistakes my father made. Howard vanished from my mother's life before I was even in it, so when he sent me a letter a few days after Mum's funeral, it was the first I'd ever heard from him. Pity he was dead. Writing from beyond the grave must be a genetic habit in my bloodline. His letter contained a key, instructions, pleas for forgiveness. I figured the dead don't have much use for absolution, so I turned to his prophetic passing, which he inexplicably expected to come any day. Clearly averse to explanations, my father preferred to leave directions to a bank on Mayfair I'd never even heard of. In that bank was a safety deposit box in his name, and myself as executor. Of course, I went, as he knew I would. I discovered that despite the evidence, he'd been legally declared dead almost 30 years ago, and so the old book and collection of notes I found had, in the eyes of the law, been mine all this time. My father's instructions were to burn the documents, raise no further questions. But that was his error. No man's immune to the shameful trappings of curiosity, and my humanity got the better of me. The university I taught at was world-renowned for 2 things: physics and linguistics. I represented the first, and the man who stood for the second was stumped by my recent acquisition. The book was indecipherable. The notes, however, showed a location somewhere in uninhabited northern Greenland. It took me almost a year to book the last flight I'd ever take. As I watched civilization disappear along with Heathrow, I realised my father had disappeared 3 decades ago, almost to the day, and I considered in turn what it was that I was leaving behind. We landed on a strip of ice a few feet wide, and within minutes I was pulling away on a chartered boat, beginning the 12-hour journey that would lead me into my past.
So, to quickly recap, we the player, Philip, received a letter from our estranged father, Howard, containing a key to a safety deposit box and instructions to burn the contents. We didn't listen, of course, and instead, we are now on a boat in northern Greenland, following a map from the safety deposit box to investigate whatever Howard was trying to cover up. And as the game is telling us, we are about to arrive, so we need to get our things. So you can click to dismiss that message, and then, like in any standard first-person shooter or first-person game, you can move around with WASD, look around with the mouse, and you can also lean left and right with Q and E, jump with space, crouch with left control, or you can run with shift, although there's not really much room for that here. As for interacting with the world, there's 2 main ways you're going to do that, broadly speaking. One of them is just looking at things, which is the pretty standard way of doing it. But this also offers a freehand mode that you can get to by pressing R, and then you can move the mouse around on the screen without actually turning the camera. You can also move towards the edge of the screen to push the camera in that direction, and press R to go back to normal. We're not really going to use that much, but it's an option if you want it, so keep that in mind. But in any case, the first sort of thing you're going to run into are things that when you look at them, you see this eye icon. This means you can right-click to inspect it to get more information about it, and then you can click again to dismiss the message. Now, once you've done this once, the eye icon will not show up again in normal mouse camera mode, but you can still right click again if you accidentally click away too quickly or what have you. Now, the next sort of objects will show this grabby hand looking icon. Now, many of these objects you can still right click to inspect to see whatever it is, but more importantly you can hold left click to grab the object, and then you can look around or move around and actually hold the object and move it around. When you're holding an object, you can also scroll down to bring it closer to you to get a closer look at it, or scroll up to move it farther away. If you want it to be very far away, you can actually right click and throw it, and some objects like the glass bottle will break when you do that. Now, other objects are a little bit different, like say doors or drawers or this lantern. You can move it around by grabbing it, but it's fixed. This lantern is always going to be attached to this very interesting chain, and the chain will always be attached to the roof. Doors can't be pulled off of their hinges, drawers can't be pulled out of desks, that sort of thing. But otherwise, they operate the same sort of way. Now, the last sort of object is a little bit different. Some objects, when you first look at them or first get close enough to them, like this notebook, you'll see them flash, and when you look at them, you'll see this other hand icon that looks like it's picking something up, and that's exactly what you do. You don't pick them up and move them around, you pick them up and keep them. This, for example, is our notebook. So, once you've picked up the notebook, you can press N to actually access it, and you can view any notes that you've collected, or you can look at your to-do list if you have written anything down, like you've found something somewhere, so Philip writes it down so he remembers he needs to find a key to a locked door, or something like that. And also, when you pick that up, the game lets us know that the next item we're looking for is in this drawer over here. So we can click and grab and then move it down and right to open it up, and inside we will see our torch, our flashlight. Now, the flashlight does exactly what you would expect. You can press F to bring it out, and you have directional light in front of you, and you can press F again to put it away. And when you pick this up, the game also lets you know about the inventory, which you can access with Tab. You can see anything you've picked up or started with, in the case of this key, but we'll get to that in a second. While the inventory is open, you can double-click things to turn them on and off, or access them like the notebook, whatever you want. You can also keep an eye on your battery for your flashlight to see how much you have left. You can also look at your health right here. And you can organize things in your inventory however you want, if that matters to you. Now, once you have grabbed the flashlight, the game also lets you know about the key in your inventory, and that key goes to the very obvious lock right here. We can double click it in our inventory, use it on the lock, and we actually receive the lock, not that it's very useful, and then we can open the locker and get the last bit of goodies inside. We get some extra batteries for our flashlight, and we get another light source, the glow stick. It does not use batteries, it is an infinite light source, but it does not work the same way. We'll tackle the differences later. Once you've collected everything, you will hear that horn, and that is letting you know that you can now proceed to the next area. But there's one more thing in here that I want to talk about. This game does something called environmental storytelling. There are things in the environment that maybe you can inspect, or notes that you can find that will tell you a little bit more about the world, or provide the world with a little bit of flavor. They are typically non-essential as far as progression goes, but they might better explain what you're doing, what's going on, or in this particular case, just provide a little bit of life to the world by adding something that doesn't need to be there, but, well, gives life to the world. So if you look in this chest over here, you'll find a note. This note is just a love letter from the wife of the fisherman whose boat we're borrowing. It doesn't really tell us anything about the story, but as you see, we can actually reference this later in the notebook if we want to. There's not really a reason to, but we can. Now, you can take a little bit of time and inspect the different things around the room if you like, but we are now ready to move on. And to do that, we need to go to the door. When you see this open door icon, that means instead of just opening and closing the door like you'll see in many cases later, this actually shows that this door takes us to a new area. So when you left click it, you'll see a loading screen with Philip's thoughts. After you've read it, if you want to, you can click to continue on into a blizzard. We're in northern Greenland, so that kind of makes sense. After a brief look around, you will quickly see there's only one way to go, and we should go that way quickly so we don't freeze to death. Now, after a brisk run to the other end of the ravine, you will find a hatch whose valve has been frozen in place. Now, we don't have any tools to deal with that, but if you were paying attention as we ran, you may have noticed some small rocks on our left. So if we go back and grab one of those, we can toss it in front of us to move a little bit more quickly, and then fail to pick it up and waste all of the time we saved. But we can grab it, throw it at the ice to shatter it, quickly move the valve clockwise to unlock the hatch, open it, and step down. Some area transitions don't require that you click on them. Instead, you can just move into them like this one. After the ladder is broken and we've fallen down, eventually we will wake up and we will see that we are in the entrance of some sort of underground facility, perhaps a mine of some sort. Depending on how long you took out in the blizzard, you may see red flashing around the edges of your screen, you may hear your heartbeat. What that means is that you're relatively low health. You don't need to worry too much. Luckily, you do regenerate health over time on your own. So as long as you don't take too much damage in a small amount of time, you should regenerate your health before you need it again. And later on, we'll get items that can restore health at will if desired. So with that in mind, let's start investigating. The first thing you'll probably notice is that it's quite dark down here, which gives us the perfect opportunity to talk about our light sources, the flashlight and the glow stick. So the flashlight, as mentioned, is a directional light source. It shows stuff only directly in front of us at quite a large distance, though not an infinite distance, as you can see, and it keeps natural coloring. Of course, the major drawback is that it runs on batteries, and you don't see stuff at the edges of your vision. The glow stick, on the other hand, solves both of those problems. The glow stick never runs out and lights up things in an area around you, with the major downsides being that it's not nearly as much range. As you can see, we need to get significantly closer to light up this door and this wall, and there's obviously a bit of a greenish hue. But even with those downsides, I find the glow stick to be more useful because seeing things at the edge of your vision prevents you from accidentally running by a hallway or a doorway and not noticing it because the flashlight had you focusing only on what's directly in front of you. So I'll be using the glow stick for most of the game. So if we continue on, we can look at this door and find that it seems to be blocked by something, so we can't go this way just yet. If we look to our left, we'll see a steel rod on the ground that we may use in a little bit, and we'll see a door leading to another room. Before charging forward, don't forget, some things can be hidden in the environment, and if we look around a little bit, say move the lid off this crate, we'll find a flare, the third of our light sources. Now, the flare works a lot like the glow stick does, with a few major differences. So if we stand at this distance, we'll notice that the door and the wall are not lit up with the glow stick. But if we use a flare, we'll see that it is lit up. It's another area light source much like the glow stick, with a reddish light instead of a greenish light, but the range is bigger. It's not quite as large as the flashlight, and the range kind of waxes and wanes like a candle would. But if you like the glow stick, want a little bit more range, and don't mind the reddish light instead of the greenish one, you can use flares. But there are still a couple of other major differences. First of which, if you switch back to another light source, say the glow stick, you will drop the flare in front of you. Now, we can just leave that flare on the ground like that and then wander around, and the flare will continue lighting up that area. But we can also pick the flare up, and we can move it around, like inside this crate if we want to for some reason, or say throw it into this other room so we can get a look around before we go inside, which can be helpful if it's a dangerous area. Now, the one major drawback to flares is that they don't last very long. In fact, in talking about how flares work, we've talked through pretty much the entire duration of this flare. I'm not really going to be using them much in this playthrough, but keep in mind they are another tool in your toolbox if you'd like to use them. And one final thing before we move on into this next room, on top of this flare running out any second now, is we will notice one other flare behind these barrels. Now, while you can squeeze your way in here and turn the camera just right to pick it up, it'd be a lot easier if we could just move these barrels. But it seems if we grab the barrel, we can't just move the mouse to move it out of the way. Some objects are heavy objects, which means you can move them, but you have to move them by actually walking with them. So we can walk to move this barrel out of the way, and then we can go pick up this flare as well. Even though we're probably never going to use it. In any case, moving on into the next room, we will see there's nothing hidden behind things or in corners or anything like that. But there is a flare on this bookshelf, and there is a hammer on this bookshelf. Now the hammer is the first of our tools. Unlike the flashlight and the glow stick, it does not have its own keybind, but we can give it one. In the inventory, you can put any item on one of these numbered slots, and then by pressing that number, say 1 in this case, we can bring the hammer out or put it away. Now what does the hammer do, you might ask? Well, lets you hit things. And many things you can break, like barrels. Unfortunately, this isn't Zelda, so we're not going to be finding much inside barrels, but we will need to break things in order to progress in various cases. To use the hammer, you don't just click with it. Instead, you have to click and hold, and then move the mouse to one side, say to the left, and then to the right. Or to the right and then to the left in order to swing it, or you can move it down and then up to jab with it. Moving it up doesn't actually do anything, unfortunately. One important thing to keep in mind while you have tools out is that if you have a tool out, you can't interact with things normally. So we grabbed this door to open it earlier, but since we have the hammer out right now, all we see is the eye icon and all we can do is inspect it. If we left click, I can smack the door, which, I mean, technically I could close the door this way. It's not very efficient or easy, but I can do it. So you need to remember that you can't grab things while you have the hammer out, because you might miss that you can interact with a door or, say, a bookshelf if you have the hammer out. Now this bookshelf is too heavy for us to just drag, so we can walk it to the side like this, revealing a boarded up tunnel. The perfect match for our newfound hammer. After breaking those boards, we can crouch and then make our way into the tunnel. We're immediately presented with an option of left or right, but spoiler, it doesn't matter. Both paths loop around to the same point, and our destination is the small room at the end of this part of the tunnel. As a quick note, if you move too close to this hatch, you are presented with a miniature jump scare, as if something's on the other side, even though we can very clearly see nothing is there. Oh well, I guess. In any case, looking to the right, we will see a barrel blocking a door. If we move that out of the way, we can open the door and make our way back into the first room. Hooray! Except we're not trying to go back there. We need to move forward, and it looks like the way forward is going to be through this metal hatch. Now, our newfound hammery friend is quite powerful, but perhaps a metal hatch is a bit too much. But there is this industrial mechanism in the room, and we picked up a steel rod earlier. Now, there's a circular hole in this, and perhaps the rod fits. So if we use the rod on it, you get that flash of light. What that flash indicates is that we have just solved a puzzle that's related to progression in the game. As an important note about those, it is impossible to accidentally progress past a point and not be able to go back if there is something important that you've missed. You cannot proceed in the game if you've forgotten to get the steel rod from this room, and as an easy way to loop back, we can go directly back into the first room if we've forgotten it for whatever reason. So don't worry too much about accidentally progressing past a certain point and not being able to return, and you've accidentally forgotten to pick up the hammer. With normal play, that is not possible. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and grab the steel rod, operate this mechanism, open the hatch, and continue on to the next area. Once you arrive, you'll hear a bit of a rock slide behind you, and Philip will write down a note letting you know that the entrance has caved in and there must be another way out. I sure hope so. After a moment, you'll also hear a growl in the distance, but don't worry too much. There are no enemies nearby just yet. The game just wants to teach you how to hide before you actually need to. And luckily, it's quite simple. You find something to hide behind, turn off your lights, and crouch. Your vision will slowly turn more and more blue as you regain your quote-unquote night vision. But I'm going to be honest, we're literally never going to use this, for reasons you'll understand later on, so let's just move on. You'll immediately run into a sign with a map of the tunnels we're in. Our location is marked at the bottom with the red circle there. From this point on, I'm just going to explain things in the order that I personally think makes the most sense. Strictly speaking, the game uses hub areas, kind of, and within some restrictions, you can complete areas in whatever order you think makes the most sense to you. For example, in this case, we're going to be heading to the office, but you don't have to do the office first. I just think it makes the most sense. And this is my walkthrough, so that's what we're gonna do. So we'll just hug the left wall to make our way over to the office. And we're there. That was easy. Hooray! So let's head in. Inside you'll find a pretty small room, but this room contains some very important things. So let's go ahead and start looking through it. Directly in front of us, you'll find some backstrin that we don't yet know why is important, but that's okay. You'll also find an officer's log. For the most part, nothing written in here is terribly important, but there are a few fun takeaways. First, you can see that there was an injury whenever this was written, and that to prevent future injuries, the officer has locked away a demolitions manual in a chest in this office. That sounds useful. Second, you'll see a reference to that hatch that was frozen shut, with a requisition order for an industrial ice pick. That's fun. And lastly, you'll see that there was some sort of archaeological find that is very strange and spooky, and also sitting directly on the table in front of us. Now, I'm not going to get too much into what the lore of this is just yet, but functionally speaking, just know these are our save points in the game. The game does automatically save as you transition between areas and solve puzzles like that, so you don't need to worry about it too much. But if you do want to intentionally save, just left-click on one of these. You'll get kind of sucked inside and flashbanged, see some spooky text. And in this case, Philip seems to see his father. Interesting. And then he's confused. So am I, Philip. So let's go ahead and keep looking through the office. Over here, you'll find some delicious batteries. In the desk, you will find two useful goodies. First off, a note. It's a newspaper clipping that talks about high suicide rates in this very mine. That's not nice. Some people think it may be mine-altering chemicals being excreted from the rocks. Other people think it may be Inuit spirits known as the Turngate. Well, other than that, there's also a small key. That seems useful, so let's get that. Over here, we will find that someone doesn't know how to put chairs away. And we will also find some beef jerky. Unfortunately, beef jerky is not a delicious snack for us, but we'll talk more about it later on. There's some more beef jerky in here. In the bottom, we do have our own tasty treat, some painkillers, which we can use to restore health whenever we want, and a flare right here. Lastly, there is a locked chest on the floor in front of us, but luckily, we already have a key. Inside, you will find the demolitions manual mentioned in the report. We're not going to read it too closely just yet, but just know it teaches us how to make a few very important, simple explosives devices that we will use in the future. For the moment though, I think that's about as good of a stopping place as any. We haven't progressed through that much of the game just yet, but we have covered a lot of topics, namely game mechanics, game controls, things like that. And luckily, we've covered almost everything at this point. So in future episodes, we'll be able to focus a lot more on just game and story progression instead of all of this other stuff. So you can look forward to that next time. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and comment down below to let me know, and subscribe if you want to see more. If you're looking for something else to watch right now, you can check out the next video in the series, or you can watch my latest video. See you next time!